welcome to WeAreDevelopers. I have Sebastian here, Sebastian Klauke. He is the Chief Digital Officer of Otto Group. Welcome, Sebastian.
Ben, thank you very much for having me.
Sebastian, you have an interesting background. You studied physics, you joined Boston Consulting Group, then you founded your own startup, Otto, which was Europe's first online shop for second-hand cars. And then you built up Boston Consulting Group's digital ventures arm. What was it that made you decide to join Otto Group as Chief Digital Officer?
There was a couple things that attracted me in Otto Group. First of all, when running BCG Digital Ventures together with my co-partners and co-founders, I always felt like this is a great job, but next thing I do should either be something I found myself again, where I'm fully in charge, or it should be really contributing on a significant level and a significant role to the digital transformation, which is a elusive thing, right? Of a big established company. So I was open for ideas coming along. Headhunter called me, and I learned a lot about Otto Group I hadn't known before. I knew, of course, it's a family-owned business. It's very, very values-driven. And this family ownership reflects in how decisions are made, reflects in the time horizon of investment decisions and so forth. That fascinated me. But then I learned how far Otto Group already was back then when I got to know them better on their route to becoming a fully digital company. I hadn't really realized that it already was the by far second biggest e-commerce player after Amazon in Europe, right? And how many fascinating brands are under the roof of Otto Group, and how digital, to say it in a funny way, the company already was. And this attracted me a lot because as a consultant or as a company builder, as a service, BCG Digital Ventures, I had always felt a little remorse if you have to do the basic evangelizing from Adam and Eve, starting what is agile? Can we make it useful for us? I always felt like, hey, this is a part that might be a very great business, but I want to leave it to others. This is not exactly where I have most fun and feel I have most impact. So the combination of a company, good governance structure, family owned, already pretty established, really leader of the pack in the retail industry, combined with a culture that is already kind of advanced on the path to being more digital, that really attracted me, right? And so I came on board a bit more than 14 months ago, and I honestly haven't regretted a single day since.
Can you tell us a little bit about your time as a founder of Otto? Because it's quite a success story. How did this whole project start?
Well, I wouldn't say it was a huge success, to be very honest. I'm always pretty upfront about that because there's no way there's no need or no use in telling bullshit around it, right? So the business model itself was pretty successful. It's still a little surprising even to myself. Basically, the way I explained it is you could order a high quality used car from Otto the same way you can order a washing machine from Otto today. You get it delivered home, you have a 14 days, no questions asked return, right? And this really flew, it took off. We got nice traction. We were ranked as a top 100 second-hand car dealership in Germany from an independent magazine after 18, 24 months. So the business model really was a success in the market. We did many founder rookie mistakes, like we screwed up our cap table pretty early on, and we didn't really see a path forward after roughly 3 years. So we sold the company way prematurely. So that part was not a huge success in the sense of it was a great economic hit. Also, the business model kind of was folded later by the acquirer. But in terms of how it worked with the end consumer in the market, and most of all, the learning and access it gave me to the digital world, for me personally, was a huge success. And it was a fantastic time, a great story, right? So, you already feel it, right? For me, starting my own business, I think this is one of the greatest challenges one can take on in business life. It's fascinating in so many aspects, and this magic of how Peter Thiel calls it 0 to 1 is you can't compare it to anything else. But I have to say, in comparison to what I do now, really inducing real change in a behemoth, large, established company is probably equally as fascinating, but it's a different kind of animal, right? It's even more about the people in a way. It's less about like getting an idea into the world. It's more like again and again moving in small baby steps with a lot of patience, but also a lot of clarity, a huge like organizational organism to change directions. And I have to say, I now feel this challenge I'm working on now is as much fun, but it's in many aspects different. And then one thing I really enjoy about my present role is that I haven't really given up on all this early stage and startup stuff. Maybe we talk about it a bit more in depth later, but a part of my role is taking care about innovation, is taking care about Otto Group internal company building, is managing our interfaces into the venture capital world. So I haven't really left the VC founded startup world fully, but I'm still like with half a foot grounded in there and with the rest in the corporate transformation world.
Okay. When I think of Otto, there's one thing I remember. I remember when I was a child and my parents had this big catalog with, 500 pages lying on the table, where we could order pretty much anything from t-shirts to ironing boards to home utilities. I remember we also had a CD-ROM at some stage where we could, do stuff on our first computer. What has changed since then? Yeah, since how has the Otto Group developed to date?
I mean, in a way, everything has changed, right? And I think there's a couple of reasons Otto Group is still alive, to be very upfront about it. Because, I mean, every other big mail order company has folded. And I think reason number one is the change started early. Yeah, I mean, this was way before I came on board. It was even before I graduated high school. In 1995, Otto Group started to work on the internet, which was like pretty mysterious, I guess, back then. Some of the folks who did it back then are still around, and of course Dr. Michael Otto is still around, who drove this as an entrepreneur. So change started pretty early, like 23 years ago. And since then, what from I've learned in the bit more than a year that I've been around here, it has never ceased, right? Change has been like the only constant around, like really working on the core businesses and pushing it further and further along the new developments. This is like what's been going on ever since, right? Like from catalog to web, from web to mobile, from mobile to whatever comes next. We're working on it right now. Of course, on very various ideas and fronts. This is what's been happening. So if you ask what has changed, everything has changed. But then I think on the other hand, something that make up the DNA probably haven't. Yeah, I haven't. As I said, I wasn't around back then, but I feel Otto Group is in a very healthy way rooted in a very strong DNA, right? And probably two things I would single out is customer centricity. I mean, also already back in mail order days, I think people focused a lot on how can we really improve the experience, the ease of shopping, the fun of shopping for our consumers, and this hasn't changed. It has only been accelerated by going digital. And second is super firm grounding in values, right? And values is reflected in like more superficial things, like of course we comply with all data privacy regulation, but it goes far beyond that. It's like there's really in the day-to-day way of doing business, there's a real ambition and eagerness to like treat our customers fairly, treat our employees fairly, treat our business partners fairly, and also take care about like greater society level considerations like environment or responsibility topics, right? And this is not just something that's written on some fancy posters hung up in the corridor and then forgotten, but it's something that's really there. You feel it when you work with the people. It comes from the shareholders, of course, the owners and entrepreneurs, but it trickles down through all the organization. And this is something I feel that hasn't changed, right? Going digital does not necessarily mean you have to like throw your values overboard or just like hand them over at the cloakroom, but you can stick to them and realize them even in the digital age.
A lot of the times when I meet chief digital officers of large organization, I have the feeling that they are often taking the the role of an evangelist. Yeah? And I feel that this is kind of in line with all the, a lot of people talk about digital transformations, like the most favorite word going around. But I don't feel that many CDOs have the real strategic role in the organization. I think in your case, this is different. Can you tell us what your role really encompasses?
First of all, I share how you see many CDO roles in the market. I often make the same joke, right? And it's like, I know many sad CDOs, because often, particularly if a company is like at the beginning of their journey to going more digital, whatever that means for the like concrete business model, it's often like, hey, we gotta hire somebody who comes from a credible digital background. We don't give them any significant team or budget, and then we say, please digitize us, but don't hurt us, right? Which of course is not working out usually. Yeah. So in this case, and I think this stems from the fact that I mentioned before that Otto is already like deep in the digital transformation, right? Our core businesses is e-commerce, right? We turn over 8 billion euros a year in e-commerce. So this is like what we do day to day. And so there is just no space in this organization for a classical CDO role. And this is reflected in the role I have, right? Which basically you can cut down in 4 big chunks. Number one is, as you mentioned, I have significant part of our core business reporting directly into me. Second is I am responsible for a couple of like service provider units on the holding level who basically contribute to doing e-commerce better, to say it in a short way. Third is I am responsible for the technology governance of Otto Group. We have a fairly decentralized setup when it comes to operational technology teams, but I've started to establish a technology governance that makes sure we strike the right balance between the need to be super nimble and local and try things out, and on the other hand have certain set of standards that in the end again make you faster, right? So this is a classical digital cross-sectional topic. And number 4, I'm responsible for all things innovation. So I manage our interface to the venture capitalists, I'm responsible for our group internal company building and so on and so forth.
That brings me to an interesting point. Founding your own startup and then working in the company building segment, you've been working with a lot of companies from 0 to 100, where speed is something that's quite easy to achieve. How is it coming from the company building and startup sector into a large established organization with, I think in the last fiscal year, 13.6 billion euros in revenues? How do you ensure that speed takes place, that innovation takes place in a fast way and changes actually happen?
Well, that's a lot of questions hidden in one, right? So, first part to answer is indeed it's very different in that respect. If you're a startup founder and you say, hey, today we scrap our product and we build it this way, everybody will do it. The only thing that stops you is if you were like playing wrong and it fails in the market, right? And in a large organization, it's all about taking the people along, of like creating a narrative, creating a target picture that people can like relate to and hop on board. So it's a whole different level of complexity when it comes to communication and like really, like people management in the plain sense of the word. Yeah. So that is where the difference is rooted, I believe. Then the funny thing about it is for an established company to survive in a very digital field of competition, right? Our biggest competitor is Amazon, right? And so they are a digital pure play that basically by accident still do some online retail, right? They're a tech company. They sell cloud services, whatnot. Marketing is big coming up on their agenda. So I think a key ingredient to surviving, not only surviving but winning, in this kind of environment is really to selectively adapt some startup habits and plug them into the corporate world. And this, if you do it just superficially and say we need a foosball table and it all needs to be a little more colorful, it's going to fail. But you really need to ask yourself, what is like the big cultural difference, right? So in the end, I believe it boils down more to culture than it does to processes. We can talk about it later, because if I do it now, I will completely explode this question. Yeah. And third, how do you make change happen in the end? I mean, it has, next to the cultural component, of course, you have to make sure change or innovation is not just an end in itself, right? If you just want to do fancy stuff because it's so cool to do fancy stuff, not gonna fly. You need to really like link it to the advancement of your core business. And often in the SaaS CDOs in the market, that's often a problem, right? Everybody's running their business units and saying, hey, I'm earning money, it's all good. And then the digital guy comes and says, hey, we should talk about AI. And then people say, yeah, talk about AI, but leave me alone. Yeah, I got work to do and I got to pay you salary, man. And so you really have to make sure you spend the majority of time not on super far out fancy stuff that might become relevant, but you stay sufficiently ambitious, but still like grounded and linked to the core business. By the way, that's the reason I love the fact so much that core business is reporting it to me, right? It keeps you grounded, keeps you honest. So maybe some aspects to your hidden multi-question.
What we do in our organization in order to gain speed is we regularly kind of try to stop doing everything we're doing, think about why we're doing things, what our goals are, and then we try to reorganize. We reorganize teams, we reorganize projects, we completely scrap some things and try to focus on the stuff that's important. Is that even possible in an organization with more than 50,000 employees?
I don't think so. I mean, the fancier answer would be, yes, of course, we do this as well. But seriously, if you look at our flagship asset, Otto, yeah, they do like roughly 3 billion e-commerce, right? So there's such a multitude of decisions to be taken every day that immediately affect your numbers this or next month, that you can't really say, like, let's do startup, like we just reshuffle everything. So you have to take a more gradual approach. You have to like single off some teams to get the freedom to work like greenfield and get freed up from it. And in those teams you can do it. But you have to, in a way, you have to tread carefully along your successful business lines, right? And that doesn't mean you can't be courageous, you can't be bold. It just means you got to be very responsible and you got to like respect the huge amount of work, intelligence that's going into keeping a machine running, right? That's something, when I was a startup founder, and even when I did BCG Digital Ventures, like one of my selling stories, and I even believed it, would in a way be, hey guys, it can't be that difficult, the startups all do it, right? But of course, it's so much more difficult if you have like this base of revenue, this amount of people, these processes to manage. So you guys strike a balance again, right?
If you're trying to attract people who have a startup mindset and who can contribute towards innovation, do you recruit people from startups? Does that even work?
We do. But I think the most important thing whenever you talk about talent and deal with talent is honesty, right? And I've seen a lot of cases in the market where a huge corporate comes along and says, hey, we want to hire the next Mark Zuckerberg and we're going to make him a billionaire or multi-billionaire and it's all going to be great. And then people come in and say, hey, I want to start like this business I've been given and I want to do it this and that way. And then somebody comes along, often from controlling, I like controllers, but it's their job to do this, and says, hey guy, you play by the rules, please. Yeah, you're not entitled to decide this or that. And then people get frustrated and value gets destroyed. Yeah? Also, it happens quite a few times, I believe, when startups are acquired by corporates. So you have to be very honest about how things work, right? You have to be super precise about, do you have a setup where you can give like entrepreneurial person really like full freedom? And can you really define and describe the boundaries of this freedom? If you can't, you probably have to rethink before you try to hire somebody entrepreneurial, right? And having said that, we are quite successful by integrating entrepreneurial characters in our group. Like, take About You, yeah, our fashion tech unicorn. This is a very founder-driven entrepreneurial culture, and it works because the boundaries have clearly been defined and there's like a good setup in terms of rules and governance, what they can and what they can't do. Yeah? Most of the things they can, which is key for that kind of stuff, but also in like smaller frameworks. If you look at our internal company building, but also if you look inside our core businesses, we have quite a few people coming from a startup background. And as I said, whenever you are honest and you really work on finding a working setup that's not just facade, but that goes beyond like the shiny, we have a founder on board, to like, let's really make it work. It can be very gratifying for people who come from an entrepreneurial background.
A lot of the companies we speak to have one big challenge, and that is ambidexterity, which means focusing on the present, on today's business, on maintenance, on operations, on generating the revenues that we're making today. But at the same time, they need to focus on the future. Where are we going to be in 10 years? How do you organize this in such a large organization? How do you structure it?
I agree with the challenge, and I think we've already implicitly mentioned it a couple of times in our conversation. To give a general answer, I'd say digital transformation will always be about like basically getting two pillars right to carry your new digital business, which is like running your existing portfolio of business models better and better, like making use of digital and just integrating it in your existing business. And then on the other hand, finding new value in new business model that can also like replace businesses from your portfolio that need to retire because they've reached end of life cycle and changing world, right? So I agree, and this is like the challenge that needs to be done. If you just do fancy, probably you start as a startup again and like just throw away billions of revenue and profit. Or if you just do this, you super ripe for disruption in the classical sense of the word. So I think what you need to do is you gotta acknowledge it is this way, right? This is very. It sounds like a no-brainer, but many companies I think don't. Many say, hey, if we just put a couple more $1 million into fancy stuff, it's kind of magically gonna solve itself. Yeah, really. I mean, it sounds. I think you will come across this if you talk to many companies. For many, digital is some kind of like the magic silver bullet. If you just do enough digital, it's just gonna fly somehow. First of all, you gotta acknowledge it's hard work also on the existing portfolio part. You mustn't go in and say, hey, this is like the boring old legacy, we gotta get rid of it, we just need more startup feel. No, you gotta really like, as top management say, hey, one of our top priorities is using digital for our core business. Full stop. Yeah? And then let's deliver, execute, right? And the moment you acknowledge this and honor this in the organization, you get rid of some part of the problem, right? And then, of course, you have to strategically invest quite a lot of money and quite a lot of management attention in the new stuff. I mean, the golden rule about new stuff is most of it fails. Yeah, that's why it's so hard. And and there's no way around failing. So you have to A, learn to fail cheaper and faster, and B, invest a sufficient amount so that there is some successes among the failures, right? And that's what we do. We invest into in-house company building. We just assigned another 85 million euros just to like B2B business models along our value chain. We've invested heavily in About You as a B2C fashion startup, but with a clean stage-gated process, like not by throwing money at it like crazy, but with a very disciplined approach. Yeah? We've invested, several $100 million into venture capital funds that we use primarily as our antennae into what's going on in the VC-funded market, to then reintegrate the best and most useful ideas for us into our core business, and so on and so forth, right? So no magic bullet answer, unfortunately, but it's just acknowledging this ambidexterity and managing it in a very hands-on but also strategic way.
What is your approach towards startup investing? You have venture funds where you are major shareholder or one of the main shareholders, such as you have eVentures, or you're involved in Project A Ventures. Do you also invest directly through the Otto Group? What is your strategy?
Basically, we have a 3-pillar innovation strategy. One is venture capital, as you said, and I always call this the paradox of corporate venture capital. If as a corporate you want to really get value from venture capital, you have to give up control. Because if you have a classical corporate VC approach, all it does is adverse selection. I mean, who as a founder early on would take in a strategic investor, which limits drastically your choices for an exit? So if you do VC, you have to do real VC. That means even if we're the biggest LP in most of the funds we're invested in, we don't have any control right in terms of investment decision or whatnot, right? So that's first pillar. Second pillar is group internal company building, which is about you, but also what we call Otto Group Digital Solutions, which is basically a company builder that does B2B asset-light business models along our value chain. This is where I just said we just like ring-fenced another 85 million to put into these models. And this is classical in-house company building. There's an idea funnel, there's a team with technologists and business people like trying things out first in a project framework. There's a strict stage-gated process where you say, hey, wow, which ones get spun off as a company, which one will get killed on project stage, and then you have follow-on investments and so on and so forth, always with the focus of creating strategic value over market value. Exiting one of these businesses, only plan B. Plan A is creating something that has value for us as a group as we keep it on board, right? And number 3, of course, is innovation in the individual existing businesses, right? You can't centralize all innovation. It's not going to work. You got to pull in the people and like enable the people who actually work on the day-to-day business challenge. So we try to run a process where we strike a nice balance between coordination and just free experimentation in the operational team. So we have a team called Innovation Management. They will like screen market developments, talk to the VCs, and try to like give impulses into our companies and business units, what they could and should try out, try to coordinate that not the same things done 3 times at 3 times the cost, but just once and then rolled out. So this is more a coordinating role, right? And in this way, it kind of comes together. And I have to say, I can say this without bragging because I haven't been on board when all this was set up. Honestly, it works pretty nicely. I mean, if you listen into the market and say who has figured out corporate innovation, Otto Group will come up kind of often, and it really does work. I mean, we have nice, successful examples on board, right?
Now, how does it work? You have a lot of different startups and early stage, later stage companies of different levels of success. About You is a very successful one. They're called the first unicorn from Hamburg.
Because they are.
Yeah, they have a valuation of over $1 billion US. So very successful. So now you have a lot of different companies scattered around the world because you're active globally.
Yeah. 30 plus countries.
Yeah. 30 plus countries who have different technologies, different business models, different best practices, both business model wise but also technology wise. Now, wouldn't the ideal case be for the Otto Group to say, we're going to try to take the best technologies and the best business models and try to learn from this and kind of streamline it across everything we do, so that we have a certain limited number of technological platforms, a certain limited number of business models? Is that the goal, to try to centralize and streamline it, or do you want to keep it in a decentralized fashion and just see where the journey takes you?
A little bit best of both worlds. I think let's just talk e-commerce, right? We also have logistics business with Hermes, and we have financial services, and let's ignore those for a second, right? And if you just look at e-commerce, also not at like brick and mortar retail, but at e-commerce where the tech stack plays a far larger role, actually. Then the target picture we're working towards is one where the most important, largest, most firepower companies in our group have a greater degree of autonomy in deciding their technology roadmap than the smaller, sometimes in a technological investment sense of the word, subcritical companies, right? So we are right now working on introducing what we call the Otto Group standard e-commerce tech stack, right? And rolling out like the battle-proven best technology we have across the group and unifying it, but with a limit, right? We won't go so far to say Otto DE, who are just transforming towards a larger share of platform business model, have now to get a sign-off on every technology decision they make. Because if you would combine this with the transformation they're doing, you would run at risk at actually like killing the speed they need for the transformation. So it's a fine balance, right? But when I mentioned before that part of my job is like establishing and running the technology governance, it's exactly about that question. It's exactly to fine-tune this boundary. Where does central and standardized make sense? And where does autonomy, speed, and probably less cost efficiency and harder like copy-paste make sense, because it pays for a greater degree of creativity and speed, right?
Mm-hmm. We touched upon it earlier in the conversation, artificial intelligence and data science. I have the feeling when I read the newspaper, when I go on online magazines that I read, there's like two buzzwords. It's AI and it's data science, and they're flying around and everyone's using it. And every company is, claiming to be doing AI and working on AI and to be doing data science. What does AI mean for Otto Group? Let's focus on AI for the beginning. What does it mean for you? What are your plans? Where do you think it's going to lead your group of companies?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of substance to AI beyond the buzzword level, right? There's a ton of stuff going on that's really going to transform every industry and also our industry. And again, we're going to be one of the first ones to be transformed, because digital is already our core in retail and omnichannel retail. So I think right now AI is something that happens a lot on the level of incremental improvements to existing business models. I don't see, like in the retail space, I don't see business models that are fully different based on AI, but I see a ton of stuff getting improved and getting really taken exponentially to a new level. Couple examples, voice interfaces definitely are going to be a thing, right? I don't think it's super likely somebody's going to do their whole product research for a new television on a pure voice interface, but voice is going to play a role in how we interact with brands and shops and retailers, right? So this is, of course, a fully AI-enabled thing. So we're working on it. We're already present on like Google Home, on Alexa, and we have quite a bit of investment and teams assigned to figure this out, take it to the next level. Also in customer service, of course, a big thing, right? And then you have stuff like, just to mention another example, if you go to Otto.de and some of our other brands in the portfolio, and you look at how customer reviews of products are presented, we have built, basically based on a machine learning approach, build a tool that aggregates reviews in a sense that goes beyond just taking the first three words, but the machine kind of understands the review and highlights the most important keywords. So you can like just fly over a very brief bit of text and you get an understanding of the aggregated content of reviews. This is something you could probably spin it off as a startup and sell it to online shops, but then it's like kind of a tough B2B sales story. But this is something for us where AI is yet another improvement for the customer experience. So we see this in conversion rate, we see this in less returns, this kind of KPIs, right? So right now, ton of incremental stuff going on, with some of those things having a potential to be bigger, more disruptive game changers along the way, right? This is how we think about it and how we invest into it.
Mm-hmm. And data intelligence as a source of increased revenue, increased margins in the group of companies?
Core day-to-day business in e-commerce, right? And honestly, one thing I have to admit I learned after I came on board in Otto Group, for a successful mail order company, this was part of their day-to-day business even before things got digital, right? I mean, it's like this arrogance of the new startup world that you think, wow, they didn't know shit, sorry. And they would just spend and not know what happened. And of course, it's not true. It was always a super test-driven, numbers-driven business model if you were successful. And funny enough, we have few companies in our portfolio where we're paper-based, catalog-based mail order still plays a significant role. Like we have, for example, a company called VIT, that from selection of products and target audience is like addressing like all the people with the matching produce and products, and So they have still a significant share of paper in their revenue mix. And you know what? They have basically, and this is since years and decades, they have like data science like profiles optimizing their catalog process, right? So actually we are coming from quite a strong heritage of this, but of course it's been put on steroids since e-commerce became the key revenue driver, and we have invested and are still investing a lot of money and capacity into like yet the next evolution of business intelligence and data-driven decision making.
Mm-hmm. I meet a lot of companies that are the opposite of Otto Group. The C-level doesn't have the mindset that it takes in order to do the digital transformation as we understand it. How do you think you can make C-level decision makers of more traditional companies who don't have this mindset aware of the sense of urgency? How do you help these companies focus on where am I going to be in 10 years time rather than I'm profitable today, I'm creating shareholder value, everything is fine? What is your idea on this?
First of all, to be very honest, I think sometimes the only way for an old school management in a traditional history to create value in terms of digital transformation is to exchange some of the people, right? Sometimes this is just the case, right? You can't teach everyone everything, right? And if people come from a super successful history of where things are pre-digital, you will need to inject fresh minds and fresh blood, right? Having said that, I believe a lot in like also transforming people and teams in realistic boundaries, right? And first of all, it's a lot about knowledge. As I said before, often digital is taken as something that is very next to magic and not really comprehensible by intellect, and just explaining and teaching people how things are done is a key ingredient. And we do this a lot with like all management levels throughout the company. We run programs like with fancy names, it's always called tech education and digital readiness and this kind of stuff. And these are very good programs because they put people in touch with the hands-on reality, how things are done. Like people from departments where digital doesn't play that big a role yet, right? To have them understand and learn. This is like the biggest driver. And it's just new knowledge out there. And then, as I said before, a lot is about the culture, and as always, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Yeah, old saying. In the end, culture will overrule every company's ability to transform itself and to stay successful in a new era, because it's all about speed, and speed is a lot about giving up control. So if you have a very chain of command driven company culture where people really want to micromanagerial stay in control, they are pretty much doomed to fail. So as an organization, you have to learn to give up control from the top and to take control from the more operational levels, which is also very difficult. It's not just the management clinging on to their privileges and power. It's also how do you get people to actually speak up, to be courageous instead of overly careful, right? And this is something I think if you go into a not digital company yet as a CEO or non-executive board and you have just one thing to focus on, you need to focus on in which respects is my culture different from a successful digital culture. Yeah?
Mm-hmm. How fast can you change a culture?
There's no general answer to that, right? It depends on many parameters. I mean, our example, I'm only around 14 months, right? So my sample of data points is not that long. But I've seen a lot of change already in this time happening culture-wise. Otto Group started to address culture, which is in its nature an implicit topic, but Otto Group started to address it explicitly December 2015 with a huge program, group-wide program called Cultural Change 4.0, right? So now this is 2.5 years and a lot has happened. There's superficial stuff like people wearing normal clothes to the office, no ties any longer, people addressing each other on a first name basis, which is superficial, and there's far deeper stuff. There's an ever increasing courage to try things out even if they fail, an ever-increasing courage to like just communicate openly across all hierarchies and all departments, this kind of stuff. So it's definitely something that happens on a multi-year timeline in a large corporation, because as you said, you in your startup, you can just like say, okay, let's push pause for a second, reshuffle, and then push play again, not working in a huge organization. How long exactly? I think it really depends on everything. Depends on how high the pressure from outside is, how fast your industry is changing, like economic pressure, but also mindset of the key players and so on and so forth.
One of the topics we touched upon is knowledge and talents. So we're speaking with a lot of companies, and we're seeing that in terms of the USP and the offering for new talents, a lot of companies are doing very similar things. So what do we typically see? Flexible working hours, remote working, fancy titles. Then we see, change stuff. You also mentioned changing the office venues, colorful sofas, free food. Where do you think successful companies will have to go in the future in order to outcompete the others? Because if everyone is changing their offices and offering free food and making everything look fancy and flexible, what's the outlook in the mid to long term?
I think perks are only the icing on the cake. If you don't have a cake, the icing is pretty worthless, right? So first and foremost, you really have to offer people a vision where you're going that's sustainable, that's credible, that's realistic. And in terms of like culture and ways of working, particularly if you speak about like tech people, you have to really listen to people and take them serious. I mean, a lot of companies still think of tech as something you throw over some specifications and then you shout at them that it's not fast enough. And if you don't like take the technology perspective seriously, if you don't like adopt agile in the true sense of the word, that you actually cross-functionally work business side and tech side together, you can offer all perks of this world and it's going to be unattractive, right? So I think, working hours, free food, it's all very nice, and we do a lot of this kind of stuff, and fancy sofas and everything. I won't even say it's not important, because it's symbolic and symbols are important means of communications. But in the end, it's about, are you legit about transforming your business model or not? If it's just facade, people are going to run away, and you're really going to lose attractivity in the employment market.
This is also in line with the research we've done. So we did research on what developers want from their employers, and what the results were that salary matters, yes, but what's more important is, for example, working for a company that has a bigger cause, working for something that's meaningful, working on innovative technologies. So from the perspective of Otto Group, what do you think are your USPs for developers and IT professionals? I had a look at your career page and I stopped scrolling at some stage because you're hiring a lot of talents, both specialists and developers. What is your USP for them?
I mean, first of all, we do have a clear vision and a path forward, right? Which is, we are, after Amazon, we are the only one big enough, I believe, to really have a long-term shot, as a generalist e-commerce player in the market. Right? With all our brands and all our business models, we're really in the game, and we're not going to push out that fast, and we're really working on making this fly, and this in a differentiated manner. As I mentioned before, this is a value-driven company. So I think we really have an alternative path to offer how you can achieve economic success in this whole e-commerce tech-driven retail play, right? And this is something that has attracted me, it has attracted many of my colleagues, and I'm very confident it will be attractive to others out there as well, right? And that's the core of our pitch as an employer.
So in the last fiscal year, you made 13.6 billion euros revenue. Now, you've announced a very ambitious goal that by 2022-23 you want to reach 17 billion euros in revenue.
Yeah.
How is that going to happen?
We're a little ahead of track, but only a little right now. But we're very, very confident we can do it. So we have a very clear plan which parts of our portfolio we want to grow more aggressively and which less aggressively. And you will understand that I can't lay it out in all detail right now, so you guys have to come on board first. No, but honestly, this is a very ambitious target, but it's not an overstretched target. We are very confident we can achieve this. E-commerce is growing, and we, in many of our business models, we're in a very strong position to take in a lot of this growth.
So you basically described your role in 4 different segments. How, from a holding perspective, do you create value for the group as a whole?
As I mentioned, right, I'm responsible for a couple teams on holding level that act as internal service providers for the businesses and companies of Otto Group, right? And the key about this is, first of all, you have to address the really pressing value levers that short and long term generate real P&L and growth impact for the business you have in your portfolio. So we have a unit called Mobile Lab. I'm not a big fan of this lab wording, but never mind, the team's great. It's like a very hands-on mobile development and mobile advertising team who develop, maintain, and bring to market many of the apps companies in Otto Group use, right? There's a team called Group Business Intelligence, and what they basically do is they provide software products that companies can use right away, integrate in their processes that increase value generation from BI perspective. So they take care a lot of anonymized customer profiles and how to make use of them in the framework of data protection regulation, right? Also, there's a development service company that's called Otto Group Solution Provider. That's more than 200 people that can basically booked as developers for certain focus topics where they own software and develop software, right? Also, there's a unit called it's basically the Otto Group Central IT department. They do very hands-on stuff they take care that all the finance and HR systems keep running, and they are also booked by business units and companies as an internal service provider. So there's a ton of stuff that's super hands-on. It's not PowerPoint. It's not just small teams telling you I know it better, but it's really taking responsibility for delivery. And the art of it, I believe, is delivery is a total must. And then to free up a little capacity in the holding to sometimes think ahead and provide your businesses in the group with insights, ideas, investments they didn't have the bandwidth amid all their day-to-day business to come up with, right? And to have something a bit earlier before it really hits you from the market, that this is like going from super decent 100% satisfaction to being delighted and really over-delivering on value.
What I like about what you're telling me is that you're not just focusing on strategies and goal setting, but you're actually focusing on hands-on execution.
Totally, yeah. We're not a financial holding. Yeah, we call it a strategic holding. Mm-hmm. And since most of our business do e-commerce in some shape or form, there's a ton of overlap. And we also, next to what I just described, there's much more. Yeah, there's a knowledge management department who make sure that best practice sharing really happens pretty successfully, by the way, which is not an easy thing to achieve. So I think this is core, because let's face it, most of our business, if they act as standalone businesses, mm-hmm. are, to say it very harshly, subcritically small, right, in an ever-changing e-commerce market environment. And so we have to join forces, right, and make sure we get the best we have out there for every brand and for every retailer we have in our portfolio.
Mm-hmm. We talked about culture and internal communication and talents. I recently heard about the Tech Festival, the Tech Summer Festival that you hosted here in Hamburg. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened there?
Yeah, I have to say that was pretty cool. I was kind of impressed. We had the idea of doing an on-campus Tech Summer Festival, and so we basically invited everybody who's tech in the stricter sense of the word, mm-hmm. right? And we quickly realized that's 1,000 people just on campus, and so we hadn't really counted in a while, right? And since tech is ever increasing and roles and teams and org charts are shifting so much, that was a nice like moment of truth where we realized, wow, this is like the biggest profession we have here on campus. And then we had a really fantastic event. It was like day before it rained, day after it rained, and it was like 25-degree and summer into the night, and we had 70 teams applying to present something in the afternoon, like highlights of their work, because it was not just a party, but it was really a festival in the sense of like people sharing knowledge and sharing stories. And we didn't have the space to accommodate everyone. So in the end, we had about like 30 topics that could get addressed, and it was so cool to see this depth of like knowledge and also of pride about the job people do. So it was just a very cool, impressive event.
Very cool.